Addison clutched her boarding pass and slung her bag over her shoulder, weaving through the crowded seating area near Gate 27. The glaring overhead lights reflected her mood, tense and uncertain. A steady mechanical hum echoed through the corridor, as if the airport itself was sighing in frustration at yet another delay. She found an empty seat beside a middle-aged man in a worn tweed jacket and settled in, forcing a polite smile that quickly faded when she glanced at the scowling faces around her. Rumor was the flight was delayed due to a late incoming plane, and there was no definite takeoff time. Addison tried to brush off the creeping impatience by mentally listing all the reasons she needed to get to Denver by the next morning: a niece's swim meet, an important client dinner, and a sense that the year was just beginning to look up for her. Missing any of these felt like a backward step. As she set down her backpack, her seatmate glanced sideways. "Are you on business or leisure?" he asked. His voice was polite enough, but Addison could sense the tension of a man whose plans had been foiled. "Business, but with a side of family obligations," Addison responded, sighing. "I'm Addison. Sorry if I'm a little distracted. It's been a long day." He returned her smile. "Felipe," he said, offering a handshake. "I'm visiting my daughter. It was supposed to be a quick flight, but I guess this day had other plans." Just then, a flight attendant in uniform approached the waiting crowd, balancing a stack of small water bottles in her arms. "Folks," she began, voice tinged with exhaustion, "we appreciate your patience. The plane we're waiting on is currently landing, but there might be an additional 30-minute delay, maybe more. We'll keep you posted." A chorus of disappointed exhalations filled the air. Addison found her eyes drifting over to a pair of college students slumped against their carry-ons, a mother trying to keep her toddler entertained with a coloring book, and an older woman in a bright green dress busily knitting something in her lap. The mother shot Addison a sympathetic glance, as if motherhood and a flight delay could rewrite the rules of patience for any adult. There was warmth in that look, and Addison felt grateful for it. Then came the announcement that raised eyebrows around the waiting area. "Would passenger Derek Miles please see the gate agent?" the overhead speaker boomed. "That's Derek Miles to gate 27. The voice vanished as quickly as it arrived, and Addison watched as a gate agent began whispering with the flight attendant. Felipe tracked Addison's gaze, curiosity etched on his face. "Missing passenger?" he asked, leaning in slightly. "Apparently," Addison said, noticing the rest of the passengers begin to buzz with speculation. She wondered who Derek Miles was and what could be so important that he was running behind. But more than that, she worried. The flight was already so late. Would they turn away a straggler who just happened to run into a bit of misfortune? Soon enough, the agent disappeared into a back office, leaving the gate area to its own uncertain hush. Addison gently touched the charm on her necklace, a small silver heart that her grandmother had given her long ago. She thought of the brief moments of kindness she had experienced in airports over the years, the laughter shared with strangers, small acts of courtesy when stress was high. If anything, these places, communal and tense, were also prime settings for unexpected human connection. As Addison took a long sip of water from a bottle the flight attendant had handed her, Felipe tapped her elbow again. "I don't mean to meddle, but it looks like something is cooking up over there." His eyes darted toward a woman in a crisp navy suit who had approached the gate agent. The agent nodded, seemingly engaged in an urgent conversation. Addison strained to hear a snippet. "I'm his sister. He's running late because of traffic. It's his birthday. We plan to—" But now, the rest of the words dissipated into the hum of conversation and overhead announcements from other gates. Addison caught the mention of birthday, and an image of some anxious sibling popped into her mind. Immediately, she imagined the scene. Derek, carrying a small cake or a balloon stuck behind a sea of cars, desperately trying to celebrate, only for the day to ruin his best-laid plans. Something about that scenario tugged at her. Birthdays were a reminder that even in the swirl of daily life, personal joy could still find a foothold. Felipe must have heard the same tidbit because his eyebrows lifted. Birthday? That's considerate of him, trying to show up for a flight on his birthday. Or maybe it's a sign he's not enjoying the day enough. He gave a short laugh, an attempt at lightheartedness. While they talked, the older woman with the knitting needles glanced up. She squinted at Addison and Felipe, her curiosity piqued. She was about to return to her knitting when the mother with the toddler spoke up loud enough for them all to hear. Did you say it's someone's birthday? Because I've got a couple of leftover cupcakes in my carry-on. They were for my daughter, but we can spare one to celebrate. The knitting lady's eyes lit up. She paused her stitching and said, "Oh, that would be so lovely. If he makes it onto the flight, we should all do something. He might be having a rotten day." Addison glanced around, noting the tired expressions of travelers who'd been bracing themselves for hours of sitting in near silence. A spark of excitement ran through her. She found herself saying, "Why don't we all celebrate together? Like a spontaneous party in the sky. It might brighten up the mood for Derek and for us, too." Felipe nodded, a grin forming on his face. "It's certainly more interesting than just sitting around complaining." Before Addison's motivation could fade, she marched up to the gate agent. The agent raised her eyes slowly. "Is there any update on the flight?" Addison asked, clearing her throat. "And about this passenger, Derek Miles? We overheard he might be coming in late. We wanted to do something special for his birthday if he actually makes it in time to board." The agent paused mid-type, surprise crossing her face. A small smile curved her lips. "No official word yet, but from what I understand, Derek's sister wants him to fly tonight because they have family waiting in Denver. They were celebrating his birthday this weekend. If you want to do something special, maybe have a word with the head flight attendant once you're boarded, they might play along." Addison thanked her and returned to the group. The mother offered to rummage through her carry-on for extra sweets. Felipe said he might be able to quickly run across the hall to a gift shop for helium balloons if the flight was indeed delayed further. Even the knitting lady chimed in. She had multicolored yarn and could craft a tiny hat or a birthday banner. The college students perked up from their slump, volunteering to help with the surprise. As if signaled by the organizational flurry, the agent announced that the aircraft had arrived and the staff would begin boarding in 15 minutes, pending the final tally of passengers. There was still no sign of Derek, but Addison felt a jolt of hope. A flight that had once seemed like a slog of waiting was now alive with purpose. Strangers were exchanging ideas, rummaging through their belongings for potential decorations, and passing around phone chargers to keep everyone's devices topped off for photos. Sure enough, Addison watched Felipe hurry across the terminal, returning with a small balloon that read, "Happy Birthday" in bright letters. The mother found 3 mini cupcakes tucked away, chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry, sporting precariously placed icing that had somehow survived rigorous jostling. When Addison inquired if the flight crew might have any spare candles, the mother laughed softly. "We might have to improvise," she said, rummaging for something that could serve as a candle. Addison caught the mother's name, Chloe, written in neat pen across a child's drawing. As Chloe's toddler tugged at her pant leg, Addison felt her heart swell with admiration for this mother going the extra mile for a stranger. When group boarding was called, Addison and her new makeshift party committee decided to hold on to their little items of celebration until they were safely in the air. The older knitter, whose name turned out to be Samira, managed to produce a small knitted strip of yarn with letters forming the word happy, though the stitches were a bit askew from the speed of her effort. She laughed, admitting she usually worked more delicately. Still, the banner had a uniquely handmade charm that made Addison's heart melt. They shuffled onto the plane, each storing their carry-ons. Addison was relieved to see the plane still had an unoccupied seat near the back, presumably Derek's. Or was it missing for some other traveler? Tension remained, but Addison and Chloe exchanged encouraging nods. Addison found her seat by the window on the right side, near Felipe, who was busy adjusting the balloon so it wouldn't pop during takeoff. They clicked their seatbelts and listened to the flight attendants go through the usual safety spiel. Outside, evening shadows stretched across the tarmac. Addison glanced around, noticing the plane's overhead bins were mostly closed, and the final passenger count would be tallied soon. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. Good evening, folks. Captain Martin here. We're expecting a smooth flight once we're cleared for takeoff. Apologies for the delay. We appreciate your patience. Still no Derek. Addison's heart sank slightly as she wondered if the seat would remain empty. She tried to imagine the heartbreak of missing your own birthday celebration. A part of her held out hope until the very last minute, right before the cabin door was scheduled to close. Then, a flurry of movement at the front of the plane drew her attention. The door reopened, something Addison rarely saw after the boarding announcement to close the doors. A gate attendant escorted a breathless man with disheveled hair onto the aircraft. He clutched a backpack and wore a childlike grin mixed with nervousness. Addison could practically hear the sigh of relief from the entire plane. This had to be Derek Miles. He hurried down the aisle, apologizing to each row as he bumped elbows and nearly tripped over a carry-on. "I'm so sorry," he murmured repeatedly. Despite looking exhausted, he radiated a momentary joy, or maybe relief, at actually making it. Addison noticed Chloe exchanging glances with Samira. Their plan was suddenly back on. Derek finally reached his seat, just 2 rows behind Addison. He stowed his backpack overhead and settled in with a heavy exhale. The flight attendants quickly closed the door, the engines hummed beneath them, and Addison's palms tingled in anticipation. How would they pull off the surprise? She caught the eye of one of the flight attendants who had an encouraging smile that suggested the crew was in on the plan. After takeoff and the seatbelt sign was turned off, Addison and Samira unbuckled, meeting Chloe and Felipe in the aisle. With hushed excitement, the small group explained to the flight attendant that they wanted to do a short announcement to celebrate Derek's birthday. The attendant hesitated only a moment before agreeing to speak to the head purser. The purser, a tall woman in a crisp uniform named Maria, listened intently to their hurried plan, eyes widening in delight as they waved around the improvised decorations. Normally, we wouldn't do large parties in flight, but seeing as this is a special circumstance, and our flight has been, shall we say, unique, I'm sure we can manage a quick announcement, Maria said. But please keep it brief and respectful. Our flight time is only about 2 hours. I'll let you know when the captain is comfortable with such an announcement. Addison nodded, exchanging a triumphant hug with Chloe. Then they hurried back to their seats, each heart thrumming with excitement. In a matter of minutes, the plane roared down the runway, lifting into the sky. The seat belt sign remained illuminated a bit longer than usual, probably due to mild turbulence. Addison could feel the small balloon pressing against her armrest. She whispered to Felipe, "Ready?" Felipe gave a discreet thumbs up. And once the sign dimmed and the overhead lights brightened, Addison glanced at the flight attendants, waiting for approval. Finally, Maria caught Addison's eye and made a subtle beckoning motion. This was their cue. Stepping gingerly into the aisle, Addison cleared her throat, heart pounding. She caught Derek's confused gaze, along with curious looks from other passengers. "Excuse me, everyone," she began in a steady voice. "We'd like to take a moment to celebrate a very special passenger on board. We know today has been stressful, we were delayed, and everyone's tired, but there's a birthday among us. Derek Miles, we heard it's your special day." Derek's eyes widened, his cheeks flushed, and he placed a hand over his mouth in surprise. Addison motioned for Chloe to approach with the mini cupcakes, each precariously balanced with a small stirring straw acting as a makeshift candle. Felipe rose from his seat, the balloon bobbing above him, and Samira proudly lifted her knitted banner, showing the word "happy" in bright yarn. Chloe's little girl giggled, reaching out curiously. The entire cabin watched in delight as Addison continued. "Though we're all strangers, we didn't want this day to slide by uncelebrated. So, from all of us who just met at Gate 27, happy birthday, Derek!" Some scattered applause drifted through the plane. A handful of rowdy cheers came from the college students, who had apparently mustered enough energy to make noise. The mother behind Addison clapped her hands. Derek, wide-eyed and blinking quickly, stood from his seat, looking speechless. Wow," he stammered. I, I don't know what to say." A smattering of laughter followed. "This is amazing. Thank you, all of you. I'm blown away." At that moment, the flight attendant dimmed the cabin lights slightly, adding to the sense of a spontaneous party. Chloe lowered a cupcake near Derek's seat, and he gingerly blew out the pretend straw candle. It didn't extinguish anything, but the symbolic gesture drew a round of affectionate applause and laughter. The passengers who had previously been dozing or scowling now peeked over seatbacks, grinning at the commotion. Derek finally found his words, his tone vibrant with gratitude. "Thank you so much for doing this," he said, scanning the faces of Addison, Felipe, Chloe, Samira, the flight attendants, and the college kids. I had this big dinner planned with my sister, but traffic, everything fell apart. I thought the day was ruined, but this is incredible. An older gentleman, 2 rows up, joined in with a resonant baritone, singing an off-key rendition of Happy Birthday. Several passengers laughed and joined, their voices weaving into a clumsy but affectionate chorus. The flight attendants, no doubt accustomed to far more serious announcements, glanced at each other with a mixture of amusement and relief that something joyful was puncturing the usual monotony and tension of airline delays. Derek blew a few kisses of gratitude as the singing ended, hugging Chloe and Addison in turn. "You all have no idea how much I needed this. Thank you." Touched by the sincerity of the moment, Addison felt her heart lighten. She noticed other passengers applauding and leaning into the aisle to greet Derek and share in the celebration. Some filmed the moment on their phones. Freed from the usual social restraints of high-altitude travel, they abandoned the typical hush and nodded in delight at the impromptu festivity. When the overhead lights returned to normal, Addison and the others drifted back to their seats. The flight attendants checked seatbelts, preparing for a hint of turbulence ahead. Addison felt a wave of warmth wash over her as Felipe patted her on the shoulder. "We actually pulled that off," he said, smiling broadly. After a few minutes, Derek appeared at Addison's row, balancing the balloon in one hand and a partially eaten cupcake in the other. "You started all this, right?" he asked, directing his bright eyes toward Addison. She could see relief and gratitude swirling behind them. "Well, we all did, really. It was a group effort," Addison answered. "We just didn't want this day to pass by sad and lonely. Delayed flights and birthdays shouldn't mix without a little celebration." Derek nodded vigorously, glancing at Felipe, Chloe, and Samira, all seated within earshot. "Honestly, thank you all. This is the best surprise I've had in a long time. If it's not too forward, maybe when we land and if layovers allow, I'd love to buy everyone coffee or something as a thank you. Felipe laughed. "Now, that's an offer I can get behind. I could use a good espresso after this crazy day." Chloe's toddler squealed, smearing pink icing on her mother's sleeve, and Chloe grinned at Derek. "Counts us in, though I might regret letting my daughter have so much sugar." They all laughed. Addison marveled at how natural it felt to speak to these people she'd never met until a few hours ago. Something about sharing a random act of kindness on an airplane bound them. She felt less like a stressed business traveler and more like someone living in the moment. In the next hour, as the plane soared above cloud layers shimmering in the moonlight, Addison chatted with Felipe about his daughter's recent graduation. She learned that Samira, the knitter, was going to Denver for a competitive quilting convention. Her knitting was just a side passion. Chloe listened in, occasionally pacifying her toddler, who found the altitude fascinating. Some of the other passengers, overhearing bits of conversation, joined in. The barrier of anonymity dissolved. People swapped stories of misconnections, shared jokes about the unpredictability of travel, and teased Derek about the most memorable birthday he'd ever have. At one point, Addison caught herself gazing out the window at the inky sky. Tiny lights twinkled far below, but they seemed less significant than the glow she felt within. It wasn't just about Derek's birthday anymore. It was the reminder that, in a world so often fractured by daily grind and stress, humans could still come together, or in this case, be pulled together by a small moment of celebration. When the pilot announced their descent into Denver, Addison felt a pang of disappointment that the flight was nearly over. The sense of camaraderie that had blossomed felt fleeting. A special gift that might fade once they were swallowed up by the bustle of the airport. She unbuckled when the plane stopped at the gate, and as the cabin lights brightened, Derek carefully maneuvered out of his seat, the balloon in tow. The flight attendant allowed him a moment to stand near the front and wave goodbye to everyone. A few more giggles and applause filled the aisle. Exiting the front door of the plane, Addison blinked at the bright lights of the jet bridge. She stepped forward, energized in a way she couldn't quite describe. Derek lingered to shake hands and exchange phone numbers with the group. Felipe stifled a yawn as they walked together. Maybe we'll cross paths again, he said, giving Addison a warm smile. If not, I'll sure remember this night. They made their way down to baggage claim, the swirl of carousels rattling, overhead announcements echoing off tall ceilings. Despite the typical chaos and the lateness of the hour, Addison felt a distinct brightness in the air. Derek's sister, the one Addison had seen earlier at the gate, rushed forward to greet him, wrapping him in a tight hug. Her eyes welled with relief. "I'm so glad you made it," she whispered, resting her head on his shoulder. "And I heard stories about what happened on the plane. You have to tell me every detail." Derek laughed, gathering the small group around, introducing his sister to Addison, Philippa, and the others. "I owe them everything," he said, his voice choked with emotion. They turned a disaster into a memorable birthday. Cameras flashed as new acquaintances took photos together near the baggage carousel, balloons bobbing overhead. Chloe's toddler squealed and leapt around the shiny linoleum floor, fueled by the final traces of sugar. Samira placed the knitted banner into Derek's sister's hands, explaining she wanted them to have it as a keepsake. Addison and Felipe posed with Derek, arms around each other's shoulders, broad smiles lighting their faces. A swirl of different backgrounds, ages, and experiences all fused for a moment longer in the bright, buzzing baggage hall. Luggage arrived, and everyone began to peel away, bound for connecting flights, hotels, or homes. In parting, Addison exchanged phone numbers and social media handles with Derek and Felipe, the promise of future get-togethers in the air. Even Samira quietly tucked her email address into Addison's palm. "In case you want to learn to knit," she teased. Chloe whisked away her sleepy toddler, who by now was nodding off, a frosting-smeared grin still on her face. Finally, Addison hoisted her suitcase off the carousel, letting the moment of reflection settle over her. She took in the group one last time, scanning their tired but warm expressions. To think, only hours earlier, she had been just another passenger, frustrated by a delay, quietly bracing against the stress. Now, she had not only brightened someone else's birthday, but forged a string of new connections in the unlikeliest of places. Derek broke away from his sister to approach Addison. She could see wetness around his eyes, though he looked indescribably happy. "I can't thank you enough," he murmured. "I'll never forget this." He dug into his pocket and withdrew a small pin shaped like a sunflower. "It's silly, but it was on my bag. Take it as a small memory." Addison accepted the pin gingerly, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm touched," she said. "Best birthday flight ever, right?" She added a playful wink. "Absolutely," he said, stepping back as his sister took his arm. The airport speaker chimed overhead, calling out connecting flights. Derek walked away, the balloon bobbing behind him. As Addison turned to leave, she felt a swirl of gratitude for the raw humanity she'd witnessed that night. In a world where flight delays often sparked negative, impatient energy, this particular delay had knit together strangers who discovered they weren't so different after all. Even though she was beyond exhausted, Addison strode out of the terminal with a renewed sense of hope. Perhaps it was the icing on the cupcakes or the sudden thrill of an in-flight birthday party, but she suspected it was something else, a realization that simple gestures, small kindnesses, could transform a forgettable, turbulent evening into something extraordinary. She caught a final glimpse of Derek and his sister hugging once more, a swirl of happiness lighting them like a spotlight. He waved at Addison and Chloe from across the terminal, a big grin on his face. Outside, the brisk Denver air greeted Addison with a gentle push. She gazed up toward the night sky before hailing a taxi. In her mind, she imagined the swirling clouds that had flown past their window just a short while ago. Above those clouds, in that narrow metal tube, a dozen travelers had discovered common ground in the simplest of celebrations, and the memory of that unity, that heartfelt intention to brighten someone's day, was something Addison knew she would carry with her long after the last piece of luggage had been claimed. In the taxi, Addison gently pinned the tiny sunflower to the zipper of her jacket. It shimmered under the streetlights, a small memento of the wonderful night. She thought of how this small object would serve as a reminder that even in the rushed, impersonal world of travel, magic could happen when people chose to come together. Yes, the flight and all its delays had tested her patience, but it had also planted in her a seed of renewed faith in humanity, and that, she mused, was worth any schedule change. Tomorrow, Addison would share the story with her niece, describing how strangers turned an ordinary plane ride into an impromptu birthday party. She smiled, imagining her niece's wide-eyed excitement at hearing about the spontaneous balloon, the improvised banner, and the mini cupcakes in the sky. Addison knew the memory would weave into her conversation with her family, shaping an anecdote that would be told and retold whenever birthdays or flight delays came up. For Addison, Felipe, Chloe, Samira, Derek, and the others on that flight, this story would live on as more than an anecdote, though. It was proof that, given a chance, people leapt at opportunities to do good. High above the clouds, they had found something that, to many, seemed elusive, a spark of true connection that chased away the gloom of a delayed night. And with that spark, they stepped off the plane a little closer, a little kinder, and a little more human.